One of the most important facets of building a successful hockey team is scouting. Throughout the winter, scouts from all 32 NHL teams brave the elements and roam the hinterlands of the United States, Canada, and Europe to find the next generation of NHL players. Each scouting staff compiles a list before the entry draft, and since 1975, they've been able to cross-reference their list with one compiled by the NHL Central Scouting Bureau, which, like many other things, has a strong connection to the Pittsburgh Penguins. In 1969, the Penguins named Jack Button as assistant GM and director of player personnel. Button came to Pittsburgh along with his wife Bridget and his three sons, Sean, Todd, and Craig Button.
We moved here, I was 5 years old, and then obviously, you're at that age where you remember things, and I still remember the first goal I scored. It was on Les Finkley. Probably when I was 15 that I realized he let me score on him. I really didn't score on him.
Jack Button worked alongside GM Jack Riley until 1974, when he was promoted to general manager. In his only full regular season at the helm, the Penguins finished with their best record at the time and had 9 20-goal scorers.
Down the right side with Stanfield.
Unfortunately, the Penguins' playoff run that season came to a disappointing end after letting a 3-0 series lead slip away against the New York Islanders.
I was here in Game 7 when the New York Islanders scored in Game 7. 1-0, Gary Innes, Eddie Westfall. Certain things you'll never forget.
Financial trouble would come to the Penguins in the offseason, creating an opportunity for Jack Button to make an historic career change.
So when the Penguins went bankrupt, and my dad had handled the bankruptcy proceedings, obviously the NHL was involved. Clarence Campbell, the president at the time. Clarence and the rest of the managers had a really good understanding of what my dad was about, so they figured, okay, this is the perfect time. It wasn't just starting a service, it was also with people that knew the business.
In 1975, Button founded the NHL's Central Scouting Bureau and led the group as its first director.
Teams can't be everywhere, and so Central Scouting really serves an incredibly important process in terms of directing you to players that they think have NHL potential.
At one point in time in my career, I think we have to go back to when I was playing. There were teams with a scouting staff of 2 or 3 people. At one point in time, just before I played, there was a scouting staff of 1 person.
GM Jim Rutherford is fortunate to have a scouting staff of more than just 1 person these days. But before we get into how the Penguins' current scouting staff operates, it's important to know how the staff has evolved over the decades. One of Jim Rutherford's former teammates, Ken Schinkel, served as head coach and remained with the Penguins organization in various capacities for 15 years.
Jack Button became the GM, and when I had talked to him, I told him I wanted to stay with the organization in some capacity, more than likely scouting.
He led a scouting staff that drafted Mario Lemieux, Craig Simpson, Zarley Zalapski, and Sean McEachern, among others.
Scouting became, to me, watching these young guys develop. That's the part that got me. Mark Recchi, Robbie Brown. I mean, these guys weren't first-round picks, but that ended up playing so well.
Before he moved on with Eddie Johnston to the Hartford Whalers, Schinkel helped a former player of his learn the ins and outs of scouting.
Kenny Schinkel was a guy, and he said, okay, here's you got to lay out your schedule, this, that, whatever. Now, when we were looking at players, we had a form that we had to fill in. He kind of showed me the ropes, showed me what to do. Greg Malone, or Bugsy as he was nicknamed by Mike Lang, had worn the Penguins uniform for 8 years. And a year after retiring in 1988, he was named the Penguins' chief scout by GM Tony Esposito. Malone held that position until 2006 under GM Craig Patrick. He was in charge of the drafts when the Penguins selected the likes of Marc-Andre Fleury, Evgeny Malkin, and Sidney Crosby.
The future basically looks very bright because obviously we end up with getting some top-notch hockey players that are coming through here.
Those were the no-brainers. But Malone was also responsible for the shrewd selections of Max Talbot in the 8th round in 2002 and Chris Letang in the 3rd round in 2005.
You know what made me good? My staff. They got to respect each other because I had Les Binkley, Charlie Hodge, Gilly Malage, one time Herbie Brooks. A lot of times it answers itself, the draft. And you got to be good to be lucky, and you got to be lucky to be good.
The Penguins scouting staff has filled out exponentially from the time Ken Schinkel was in charge, but the NHL's Central Scouting Bureau still remains a vital source of information for all 32 member clubs, and the methodology is slightly more sophisticated.
How they used to go and measure players, they would try to get down at ice level, and then they would try to see where they were by the bricks on the wall. And then they would know, okay, that brick, like he walked under that brick, that's 74 inches, okay, he's 3 inches on skate, he's 5'11".
Nowadays, the NHL invites draft prospects to their annual scouting combine. This is where prospects are measured and go through a gauntlet of tests under the watchful eyes of scouts and strength coaches.
I think it's important to recognize that this is a snapshot in time, you know? You don't know where each athlete is in their yearly progression, where they are in their physical progression, where they are in their mental progression. So from our perspective, you know, we have a different eye that the scouts who will watch the on-ice game would be watching for. So anything that we can pick up that might help differentiate one guy from another, I think is hopefully beneficial for them come draft day.
While the prospects are preparing for the draft, so too are the scouts, as they get together to create a master list to work off of on draft day. Leading the group for the Penguins is Director of Amateur Scouting, Patrick Alvin.
Our job is to project the player for the NHL. It's not to project what the player will do next year or 2 years from now at the junior level or college level. Our job is to project what the player will be in the NHL.
The ultimate goal for any of the scouts are to win the Stanley Cup. You know, there is times during the year when traveling is tough. Without the support from the family, it wouldn't work.
These guys are incredible. I mean, they go through tough times. I mean, they're in small towns, they're going through snowstorms late at night to get to the next town, and they put in a lot of hard hours.
He knows when to jump up and can make plays. Defensively, he is cautious.
We might have him right at the right spot or maybe a little too low, but you know, third round, if he's there, I'd be really excited.
I want to hear their opinion. I want to challenge them, and I want them to, know everything about the players. The more information we can get on certain players, the better decisions are made.
Those decisions are ultimately made on the draft floor when the Penguins are on the clock, and Rutherford is always prepared for that moment.
What I make clear to our scouting staff is you need to prioritize your list, because nothing's changed from the time they put the list together. So when it's our turn to pick, it's whoever the highest guy is on the list that's still left.
While Rutherford's decision-making process hasn't really changed, he did alter one thing at this year's draft in Vancouver.
One of the things I did this year, I wish I'd have done it sooner, is that Patrick Alvin was the guy that announced our first pick.
Pittsburgh Penguins prospect from Sherbrooke in Quebec Major Junior League, Samuel Pullen.
At the draft this year, most teams, the general manager goes up, announces the pick on the stage, and through respect for what he does and the hard work he puts in, I felt it was the right thing that he announced that pick.